Well, actually, Elvis loved the song. That was when he and Priscilla were having their problems, which I met her recently.
At 79 years old, Dolly Parton has finally opened up about one of the most emotional chapters of her career. For decades, fans have wondered what really happened between the Queen of Country and the King of Rock and Roll. And now, Dolly is sharing her side of the story. Join us as we uncover the truth behind Dolly's silence and the heartbreaking choice she had to make. From shy boy to rebel. Elvis Presley's story began in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he was born on January 8, 1935. His family was very poor, living in a small two-room house built by his father. Times were difficult, and money was always short. Yet even in those tough years, music was part of his daily life. It was more than entertainment, it was comfort and hope. As a child, Elvis grew up hearing the sounds that surrounded his community. On Sundays, he sat in church, where the strong voices of gospel choirs filled the room with energy and devotion. During the week, he heard country music playing on the radio, with its heartfelt lyrics and simple but powerful melodies. And out on the streets, the sound of African-American blues drifted through the air, carrying stories of struggle, love, and survival. These three worlds, gospel, country, and blues, came together in Elvis's ears and stayed with him. They shaped how he thought about music long before he ever sang into a microphone. When Elvis was a teenager, his family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. The city gave him even more chances to hear new music. Beale Street, with its blues clubs and lively nightlife, exposed him to performers who had their own unique sounds. Elvis absorbed it all, not limiting himself to one style. He didn't know it then, but this mix of influences would later make him stand out from every other singer of his time. Elvis's first real step into music history happened in 1953 when he walked into Sun Records in Memphis. At the time, his goal was simple. He wanted to make a recording as a gift for his mother. He paid a small fee to sing a couple of songs, never imagining that this visit would change his life. Behind the studio was producer Sam Phillips, a man always searching for fresh talent. When Phillips heard Elvis sing, he noticed something different. Elvis wasn't copying the styles of others. His voice carried the soul of gospel, the rhythm of blues, and the honesty of country. Phillips realized this young man had a rare gift, something powerful that audiences had not yet experienced. With Phillips's guidance, Elvis recorded songs that quickly caught the attention of listeners. By the mid-1950s, his career took off. Songs like Heartbreak Hotel, Blue Suede Shoes, and Hound Dog stormed the charts. Each track carried a new kind of energy. His music was fast, loud, and exciting, and it broke away from the softer, safer styles that had filled radio stations for years. Young people across America felt like Elvis was speaking directly to them. His music gave them freedom and excitement in a world where their voices often felt ignored. But not everyone approved. Elvis became famous not just for his songs, but for his stage performances. When he appeared on television, he moved with confidence, shaking his hips and dancing in ways that shocked older generations. Parents and critics called it inappropriate, while teenagers screamed with joy. For the first time, music wasn't just about listening. It was about feeling and seeing something new. Elvis was at the center of a cultural shift, one that made him both loved and criticized. Even with all the controversy, Elvis showed he was more than a rock and roll singer. His talent stretched beyond loud, energetic hits. He could also perform tender love songs that melted hearts. Songs like Love Me Tender and later Can't Help Falling in Love displayed a softer side of him. This balance made him unique. Fans could dance wildly to his rock tracks one moment and then feel deeply moved by his ballads the next. It allowed him to reach a wide audience, winning over people who might not have liked only rock and roll. Beyond his voice, Elvis built an image that was impossible to ignore. His slick hair, flashy outfits, and bold stage presence made him stand out everywhere he went. He wasn't just singing songs, he was presenting a new way of being on stage. To his fans, he represented freedom, boldness, and individuality. Hollywood soon took notice, and Elvis began appearing in films. Many of the plots were light and sometimes criticized for lacking depth, but the music always shined. His films gave him another way to connect with fans and spread his songs even further. Whether people thought of him as a serious actor or not, Elvis was everywhere, on the radio, on stage, and on the big screen. By the late 1960s, some wondered if Elvis could still hold the same power he once had. But in 1968, he silenced all doubts with a television comeback special. Wearing a black leather suit, he performed with the same fire and confidence that had first made him a star. Viewers were reminded that Elvis hadn't lost his spark. He still had the voice, the presence, and the energy that had once shocked the world. The special was a turning point, showing that his talent remained strong no matter how many years had passed. From humble beginnings in Mississippi to commanding stages across America, Elvis Presley rose to become one of the most unforgettable names in music. He changed the sound of the radio, challenged cultural norms, and proved that music could bring together influences from every corner of life. And this is where Dolly Parton's story starts to cross paths with his, because even as a little girl in Tennessee, she was listening. The little girl in the Smoky Mountains. Dolly Parton's story began far from the bright lights of Nashville. She grew up in a one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, surrounded by a large family of 12 children. Life was simple, but it was also filled with hardship. Money was always short, and her family often struggled to meet basic needs. Despite this, there was something in their home that kept their spirits alive: music. Music wasn't treated as a luxury in the Parton household. It was woven into daily life. Dolly's mother would sing old mountain ballads, passing down songs that had lived in the family for generations. These songs told stories of love, loss, and faith, and they gave Dolly an early understanding of how powerful words and melodies could be. Her father, though not a musician, supported the idea of his children singing and playing whenever they could. For Dolly, music quickly became more than entertainment. It was her way of escaping the reality of poverty and imagining a world beyond the mountains. When she sang, she felt free, and she began to dream that maybe one day her voice could carry her into a different life. That dream grew stronger when she first heard Elvis Presley's voice. Dolly was about 10 years old when Elvis came onto the radio. The moment she heard him, she was captivated. His voice sounded unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't just country, it wasn't just gospel, and it wasn't only blues. It was all of those things together, blended into something completely new. To a young girl used to the traditional folk songs of her community, Elvis sounded like the future. Dolly would sit as close to the radio as possible, trying not to miss a single word or note when Elvis's songs played. She listened carefully, studying the way his voice rose and fell, the emotion he put into every line, and the way the music seemed to fill the room with life. She later recalled how she would almost hold her breath, as if she didn't want any distraction to break the spell of hearing him. Elvis's music was more than sound. It was an experience, and for Dolly, it was unforgettable. Elvis also felt personal to her in ways that went beyond music. Like Dolly, he came from a poor family in the rural South. He had known struggle, and he had worked his way up with nothing but talent and determination. For Dolly, this was proof that her own dreams were not impossible. If Elvis could rise from poverty in Mississippi to become a voice recognized across the country, why couldn't she? His story made her believe that background didn't have to define destiny. As she grew older, Elvis became something like an invisible mentor. Dolly didn't know him personally, but she studied him closely. Every time he appeared on television, she paid attention not just to his singing, but to how he stood, how he moved, and how he held an audience's attention. She realized that being a performer wasn't only about having a strong voice. It was about presence, confidence, and the ability to connect with people. When she was alone in the mountains, Dolly would sometimes practice by singing to the trees as though they were her audience. She imagined herself on a stage, winning the same kind of cheers and admiration that Elvis did. Even though her surroundings were simple, her imagination was big, and Elvis was at the center of it. She dreamed of one day meeting him, maybe even sharing a stage, though the idea felt overwhelming for a little girl from the hills of Tennessee. At school, Dolly's classmates and teachers noticed her voice. Whenever she sang, people stopped to listen. Her talent stood out, and it gave her small but important opportunities to perform at local events. Soon, she was singing on small radio programs, testing out her skills in front of real audiences. Yet even in these early steps, she kept comparing her path to Elvis's. His career was the map she followed, showing her what might be possible if she worked hard enough. With each new chance to sing, Dolly's confidence grew. She began writing her own songs as a child, scribbling lyrics in notebooks and humming melodies to herself. In those moments, Elvis's example stayed in her mind. He had shown her that a performer could be more than just a voice. They could tell stories, move people, and break barriers. Dolly took that lesson to heart, and it helped her believe that her voice and her songs might one day matter too. For Dolly, Elvis was never just a singer on the radio. He was proof that her dreams had value. He made her feel less alone in her ambitions, and he planted the idea that a poor child from the South could grow up to touch the world with music. And years later, those dreams would bring Dolly face to face with a choice she never expected: whether to let Elvis record one of her most personal songs. Dolly's breakthrough. By the late 1960s, Dolly Parton had already made her way out of the Smoky Mountains and into the heart of country music, Nashville. She was still very young, but her determination was unmatched. One of the most important moments in her early career came when she partnered with Porter Wagoner, a popular country singer and television host. Wagoner had a successful show, The Porter Wagoner Show, which aired nationally and had a wide audience. In 1967, he invited Dolly to join him as his regular duet partner on the program. For Dolly, this was a huge opportunity. She would now be performing on television every week, reaching millions of viewers who had never heard of her before. At first, many fans of the show were unsure about Dolly. They had been attached to Wagoner's previous female partner and weren't quick to accept a newcomer. But Dolly's charm, warm personality, and incredible voice soon won them over. She and Porter began recording music together, releasing several successful duet albums. Some of their songs climbed the charts, and their partnership brought Dolly the recognition she had been hoping for. During this time, Dolly also kept writing songs on her own. She wrote about her family, her roots in the Smoky Mountains, and her feelings about love and heartbreak. Her songwriting made her stand out in Nashville, where not every singer wrote their own material. Bit by bit, Dolly was proving herself not only as a performer, but also as a creative force in country music. As the years passed, however, Dolly began to feel limited by her partnership with Wagoner. She was grateful to him for giving her such an important break, but she also wanted to grow as a solo artist. She dreamed of making her own decisions, following her own style, and having full control over her career. The partnership that had started as a blessing slowly became a source of tension. Porter saw Dolly as part of his show, while Dolly saw herself as ready for independence. In 1973, Dolly sat down and wrote "I Will Always Love You." The song was her farewell letter to Porter Wagoner. Its lyrics spoke of love, gratitude, and respect, but also of the need to go forward alone. Dolly poured her emotions into the song, and when she finished, she knew it carried the truth of her feelings. It wasn't just a breakup song, it was a thank you song. She later said that she hoped the song would explain everything she couldn't quite say in words. When Porter heard the song, he reportedly understood exactly what Dolly meant. Even though their parting was difficult, the song made it clear that she still cared for him and appreciated all he had done. This ability to turn such a personal and complicated moment into music showed the depth of Dolly's talent. When I Will Always Love You was released in 1974, it quickly climbed to the top of the country charts. It reached #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart, proving that Dolly's instincts were right. She could succeed as a solo artist. Listeners connected deeply to the song because of its honesty. It wasn't just about Dolly and Porter. It was about anyone who had ever needed to say goodbye with love rather than anger. The song's gentle melody and heartfelt lyrics made it unforgettable. Dolly's decision to leave Porter Wagoner was not easy, but the way she handled it showed her strength, her kindness, and her creativity. She chose music as her way to express feelings that could not be said any other way, and in doing so, she created a timeless classic. But what Dolly didn't know at the time was that this very song would one day bring her face to face with Elvis Presley himself. The Unforgettable Offer. After Dolly Parton released I Will Always Love You in 1974, the song quickly proved itself as one of the most heartfelt ballads in country music. Its success caught the attention of many artists, but one admirer stood out above all others: Elvis Presley. For Dolly, who had adored Elvis since childhood, the idea that he wanted to sing her song felt like a dream. For Dolly, the news was almost overwhelming. She had spent her childhood idolizing Elvis, listening to his voice on the radio, and studying his every move. Now, years later, her hero wanted to perform a song she had written from her own heart. The thought of Elvis singing her words, giving them his powerful sound, was almost too much to believe. It was the kind of honor every songwriter dreams of. The next step came when Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, reached out to Dolly to discuss the details. Parker was known in the music world as a tough and shrewd negotiator. He had managed Elvis for years, building his career into one of the biggest in the world. When Parker spoke, it was understood that he was speaking not just for himself but for Elvis as well. At first, Dolly was thrilled by the idea of Elvis recording her song. She could hardly imagine a greater moment in her career. But then Parker explained the condition. For Elvis to record I Will Always Love You, Dolly would need to sign over half of the publishing rights. This was not unusual for Elvis's recordings at the time. His team often demanded publishing control as part of the deal. If a songwriter agreed, they would gain the glory of having Elvis sing their work, but they would lose ownership of a large share of the song's future earnings. For Dolly, this condition came as a shock. I Will Always Love You was more than just another song to her. It was a deeply personal piece written from her own experiences. It represented her independence, her gratitude, and her voice as an artist. Giving away half of it felt like giving away part of herself. Dolly faced an impossible choice. On one side was her lifelong dream of hearing Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, sing her words. On the other side was her determination to protect her work and her future. She knew that keeping full ownership of the song meant she could control where it went and how it was used. She also knew that giving away those rights could limit her ability to benefit from the song later. She struggled with the decision. For someone who had grown up admiring Elvis so deeply, saying no felt unthinkable. Dolly later admitted that she went home and cried all night after hearing Parker's demand. The chance to hear Elvis sing her ballad was something she had dreamed about since she was a little girl, and now it seemed within reach, yet she had to turn it down. In the end, Dolly chose to stand firm. She refused to give up the publishing rights, even though it meant Elvis would not record the song. It was one of the hardest choices she ever made, but it was also one of the most important. She believed in protecting her work, even if it meant sacrificing the chance to see her childhood hero bring it to life. And while Elvis never recorded the song, Dolly's journey with I Will Always Love You was far from over, because years later, it would find a new voice that carried it around the world. Elvis's final years and untimely death. As the 1970s moved forward, Elvis Presley was no longer the young man shaking up television screens with his daring moves and groundbreaking music. He was still adored by millions, but the weight of fame had taken its toll. For 2 decades, he had lived under constant pressure to perform, record, tour, and remain the symbol of rock and roll. The endless attention, the demands of the industry, and the strain of always being in the public eye wore him down. Behind the stage lights, Elvis faced personal struggles. His marriage to Priscilla Presley had ended in divorce in 1973, and though they remained connected through their daughter, Lisa Marie, the split left him lonely. He also struggled with the heavy expectations placed on him, not only as a performer but also as a cultural icon who seemed larger than life. To cope with stress, physical pain, and long nights of insomnia, Elvis began relying more heavily on prescription drugs. These were not illegal substances bought on the street. They were medications given to him by doctors, but he used them often and in large amounts. Over time, this dependence affected both his health and his spirit. By the mid-1970s, the effects of his lifestyle became visible. His weight changed dramatically from year to year, and his energy levels were inconsistent. On some nights, he still managed to perform with the charisma and passion that had made him famous. On others, he looked tired, sluggish, and far older than his actual age. His fans noticed the changes, but many continued to support him with unconditional loyalty. Even when he was not at his best, the chance to be in the same room as Elvis Presley, to hear his voice live, was enough to draw crowds. Those final years were filled with touring, as Elvis continued to give concerts across the United States. He often wore his famous jumpsuits, which had once highlighted his energetic performances, but now sometimes seemed to emphasize his physical struggles. Despite his declining health, the devotion of his audience never wavered. People came to see not only the performer, but also the legend, a man whose music had changed their lives. On August 16, 1977, the world lost Elvis Presley. That morning, he was found unconscious in his bathroom at his Graceland home in Memphis, Tennessee. Efforts to revive him failed, and he was later declared dead at the age of 42. The official cause was listed as a heart attack, but his long-term dependence on prescription drugs was a major factor that worsened his condition. The news spread quickly and sent shockwaves across the globe. Fans, many of whom had grown up with his music, were stunned. The idea that Elvis, the man who had seemed larger than life, who had changed the sound of music, and who had always appeared untouchable, was suddenly gone was almost impossible to believe. Radio stations immediately played his greatest hits in tribute, while television networks rushed to cover the story. Newspapers around the world printed headlines mourning the king of rock and roll. Dolly breaks her silence at 79. At 79 years old, Dolly Parton still speaks with the same warmth and honesty that have defined her entire life. When she talks about Elvis Presley today, her words carry both respect and a quiet sadness. She has never hidden how much she admired him, but in recent years she has opened up more than ever about what it meant when Elvis wanted to sing "I Will Always Love You" and how it felt when it never happened. Dolly often describes Elvis as one of the most magnetic performers she has ever seen. Even decades later, she remembers the way he could command a room simply by walking into it. His stage presence, his charisma, and his unmistakable voice made him unforgettable. To her, he was not just a singer, he was a force of nature. When she thinks back to her childhood in Tennessee, sitting close to the radio to hear him sing, she realizes just how deeply he shaped her dreams. That admiration never faded, even after she became a star herself. One of the most emotional parts of her story is imagining what it would have been like to hear Elvis sing her own words. Dolly has admitted that she sometimes wonders how his deep emotional voice would have sounded on "I Will Always Love You." The thought of Elvis taking her lyrics, which were so personal to her, and giving them his style is something that still touches her heart. She says she can almost hear it in her mind, though she will never know for sure. Despite the disappointment she felt at the time, Dolly has never spoken of Elvis with bitterness. She calls the decision to turn down Colonel Tom Parker's demand for half the publishing rights one of the hardest choices of her career. She went home and cried after saying no, knowing she had just lost the chance to have her childhood hero sing her song. But she also knew that protecting her songwriting was more important. Today, she looks back on that moment not with regret, but with understanding. She knows that standing firm secured her future as an artist and gave her control over her work in a way that shaped everything that came after. Part of Dolly's peace with that decision comes from what happened years later with Whitney Houston's version of "I Will Always Love You." Dolly has often said she believes the song ended up exactly where it was meant to be. Whitney's recording introduced it to the entire world and turned it into one of the most beloved songs in music history. Dolly has described listening to Whitney's voice on the song as both overwhelming and humbling. She feels it was fate that Whitney carried the song to new heights, even if Elvis never had the chance. Still, even with all the success, her heart always circles back to Elvis. When she reflects on her career, she often pauses when his name comes up, as if remembering both the joy he gave her and the dream that slipped away. She has admitted that she always kept a special place in her heart for him, not only because he was the king of rock and roll, but also because he had once come so close to making her music part of his story. After holding these feelings for so many years, Dolly has finally confessed the depth of her admiration for Elvis. She has spoken openly about how much he inspired her as a child, how close she came to sharing a song with him, and how that memory has stayed with her for decades. Her words carry a mix of nostalgia, gratitude, and unshakable what-ifs. She wonders what it would have meant to hear him on stage singing her lyrics, but she also knows her journey turned out the way it was meant to. By breaking her silence at 79, Dolly has shown that some stories take a lifetime to fully tell. Her voice, when she talks about Elvis, is tender, filled with the same respect she had as a young girl listening to him on the radio. There is no bitterness, only love and reverence for a man who shaped her path more than he ever knew. And as Dolly shares these reflections, one truth becomes clear. Her story with Elvis may not have ended in the studio, but it will always live on in her heart. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content on the lives of the world's greatest icons.